The security camera captured everything. HOA President Margaret Whitmore grabbed my 3-week-old daughter's $45 specialized formula bottle from our porch and threw it in the trash. My premature baby was starving, crying desperately for food. Margaret smiled coldly at the camera, knowing exactly what she'd done. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The security camera captured everything in perfect detail. Margaret Whitmore, our HOA president, grabbing my 3-week-old daughter's prepared milk bottle from our front porch and throwing it directly into the trash can. Then she looked straight at the camera and smiled, a cold, cruel smile that said she knew exactly what she was doing. My wife Sarah was inside our house, still recovering from emergency C-section surgery. Our daughter Lily had been born premature at 32 weeks and was having severe feeding difficulties. The pediatrician had put her on a special formula that cost $45 per bottle and had to be prepared in exact measurements every 3 hours. Any deviation from the schedule could cause dangerous blood sugar drops. I had just stepped outside to get the mail when I saw Margaret walking away from our porch, looking satisfied with herself. Something felt wrong about her expression, too pleased, too triumphant. "What did you want, Mrs. Whitmore?" I called out. She turned with that same cold smile. "Just checking on community standards, Mr. Davis. Making sure everyone follows the rules." "What rules?" "The rules about keeping unsightly items off front porches. Bottles, baby equipment, medical supplies, they all violate our aesthetic standards." My blood ran cold. I had set Lily's bottle outside for exactly 30 seconds while I grabbed the mail from the mailbox. Our pediatrician had insisted the formula needed to be at room temperature before feeding, so I'd brought it outside to adjust to the cooler October air. I rushed to the trash can and found Lily's bottle at the bottom, the specially prepared formula wasted and contaminated. "You threw away my daughter's bottle?" I couldn't believe what I was seeing. "I removed a code violation from your porch," Margaret said coldly. "Baby bottles and feeding equipment cannot be left visible from the street. That was Lily's next feeding. She needs this formula every 3 hours. Then you should keep it inside like responsible parents. This community has standards about visible baby items." I pulled out the bottle, now contaminated and unusable. The carefully measured formula vitamins, nutrients and specialized proteins for premature babies was now garbage. This formula costs $45 per bottle. Our daughter has feeding problems and needs this exact mixture. Margaret shrugged with complete indifference. "Then you shouldn't leave expensive items on your porch where they violate community guidelines." It was outside for 30 seconds while I got the mail. 30 seconds or 30 minutes, the rule is the same. No baby equipment visible from the street. I was shaking with rage. Our daughter is 3 weeks old. She's premature and has feeding difficulties. This was her next meal. "Your personal problems don't excuse code violations," Margaret replied icily. "Other residents shouldn't have to look at baby bottles and feeding equipment when they're trying to enjoy the neighborhood." Enjoy the neighborhood? It's a baby bottle. It's visual pollution that brings down property values and creates an unsightly appearance. Sarah appeared at the front door, moving slowly because of her surgical recovery. She still had staples in her abdomen from the emergency C-section and couldn't lift anything heavier than Lily. "David, what's wrong? Where's Lily's bottle? She needs to eat in 15 minutes. "Mrs. Whitmore threw it in the trash," I said, showing her the contaminated bottle. Sarah's face went white with shock and fear. "What? That was her 2 p.m. feeding. She needs that exact formula mixture." "Then you should have kept it inside," Margaret said without any sympathy. "Baby items on porches are unsightly and inappropriate for a family community." "Unsightly?" Sarah's voice was shaking. "It's a baby bottle. Our daughter needs to eat." "Your daughter's needs don't override community standards," Margaret said firmly. "Other families don't want to see baby equipment when they're walking through the neighborhood. Other families understand that babies need to eat." I shouted. Margaret stepped closer, her face hardening with anger. "Other families manage to raise children without violating community aesthetics. Your inability to follow simple rules isn't my problem." "Simple rules? You threw away a baby's food." "I removed a code violation. The fact that it contained food is irrelevant to the aesthetic violation it created." Sarah started crying. "Lily needs to eat in 10 minutes. That formula takes 30 minutes to prepare properly, and we have to get the measurements exactly right or she won't digest it." "Then you should have planned better," Margaret said coldly. "Responsible parents don't leave feeding equipment where it violates community rules. Responsible parents don't throw away babies' food." I was losing control of my temper. Margaret's eyes flashed with satisfaction at my anger. Responsible community leaders don't allow rule violations just because residents claim special circumstances. Special circumstances? She's a premature baby. She's a resident whose equipment is creating visual pollution in our community space. From inside the house, we could hear Lily starting to cry, her hungry cry that meant she needed to eat immediately. The sound cut through my heart because I knew we couldn't feed her. She's hungry, Sarah said desperately, tears streaming down her face. I need to feed her now. Then feed her, Margaret said with cruel satisfaction. Just make sure you don't leave any baby equipment where it violates community standards again. The formula takes 30 minutes to prepare. Sarah cried. She can't wait that long. Her blood sugar will drop. Margaret shrugged again, completely unmoved by a mother's desperation. That's not my problem. Next time, follow the rules. She's 3 weeks old. Sarah sobbed. She's just a baby. She's a baby whose equipment is violating community standards, Margaret corrected. Age doesn't excuse rule violations. As Sarah rushed inside to try to prepare another bottle while Lily's cries grew more desperate, Margaret turned to leave. But I wasn't finished with her. Mrs. Whitmore, you just wasted $45 worth of specialized formula and made a hungry baby wait for food. How do you sleep at night? She turned back with that same cold smile. I sleep very well knowing I'm protecting this community from people who think their personal problems excuse them from following rules. Personal problems? We're talking about feeding a newborn baby. We're talking about maintaining community standards that everyone else manages to follow without difficulty. What other families have premature newborns right now? Margaret paused, realizing she had revealed something. That's not the point. The point is rules apply to everyone equally. So you specifically target families with babies? I specifically target rule violations regardless of the circumstances behind them. Lily's crying was getting louder and more desperate. The sound carried through our front windows, the heartbreaking wail of a hungry baby who couldn't understand why she wasn't being fed. Sarah called from inside, panic in her voice. David, I can't get the formula to mix properly. The ratios aren't right. She needs the pre-made bottle. Margaret heard this and actually smiled wider. Perhaps this will teach you to follow community guidelines in the future. You're enjoying this, I realized with horror. You're enjoying making a baby suffer. I'm enjoying the enforcement of rules that protect everyone's property values and quality of life. By making newborns go hungry? By ensuring that baby equipment doesn't turn our neighborhood into a daycare center appearance. I pulled out my phone to call 911. This is child endangerment. Margaret laughed. For what? Enforcing HOA regulations? I have every right to remove code violations from community property. You threw away a baby's food. I removed unsightly equipment from a front porch. The fact that it contained food is irrelevant to the code violation. While I was on the phone with police, Sarah came outside carrying Lily, who was crying frantically. My wife's face was pale with exhaustion and fear. The new formula isn't working, Sarah said through tears. She won't take it. The mixture is wrong. She needs her specific blend. Margaret looked at the crying baby with complete indifference. Then you should have been more careful with community property standards. She's 3 weeks old. Sarah cried, rocking Lily desperately. She's hungry and scared. And she'll eat when you prepare food that doesn't violate community standards. How does a baby bottle violate standards? Visible baby equipment suggests that families with excessive child-rearing needs live here. That impacts property values and community aesthetics. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Excessive child-rearing needs? She's a baby. She's a baby whose equipment is creating visual pollution in our community space. Sarah was now crying as hard as Lily, both of them in distress while Margaret watched with satisfaction. Please, Mrs. Whitmore. Can't you make an exception just this once? She's so little and she's hungry. Exceptions destroy rule systems, Margaret said coldly. If I allow baby bottles on porches today, tomorrow it's strollers, then playpens, then toys. Before long, the whole neighborhood looks like a daycare center. One bottle for 30 seconds while I got the mail. 30 seconds of visible baby equipment is still a violation. That's when I remembered the security camera. I had installed it last month after some packages went missing from our porch. Mrs. Whitmore, did you know we have a security camera? Her confidence wavered slightly for the first time. What does that have to do with anything? It recorded everything you just did. Margaret's face went pale. I didn't do anything illegal. I enforced community standards. You threw away a baby's food while she was crying from hunger. I removed a code violation from community property, while knowing it would make a newborn baby suffer. The baby's suffering is due to her parents' failure to follow community rules. I was already pulling up the camera footage on my phone. The video was crystal clear: Margaret walking up to our porch, looking around to make sure no one was watching, taking the bottle, examining it, then deliberately throwing it in the trash can. Then she looked directly at the camera and smiled. "This video shows you deliberately throwing away a hungry baby's food," I said, turning the phone so she could see. Margaret watched the footage, her expression growing more nervous. "That video shows me enforcing legitimate community standards. It shows you being cruel to a 3-week-old baby. It shows me maintaining property values that protect everyone's investment." By now, other neighbors had heard Lily's crying and come outside to see what was happening. Mrs. Patterson from across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Chen from next door, and the Johnson family from down the block all gathered around. "Is the baby okay?" Mrs. Patterson asked with concern. "Mrs. Whitmore threw away her bottle," Sarah explained through tears. "Now she can't eat and we can't get the replacement formula right." Mrs. Patterson looked shocked. "Margaret, you threw away a baby's food?" "I enforced community standards," Margaret said, but she was starting to look less confident with more witnesses. "By making a newborn go hungry? By maintaining rules that protect everyone's property values. Property values are more important than feeding babies?" Mr. Chin asked, incredulous. "Community standards are more important than individual convenience." "Individual convenience?" Mrs. Johnson, a mother of 2, stepped forward angrily. "We're talking about a hungry baby. We're talking about rule violations that affect the entire community's property values." The police arrived just as the crowd was growing larger and angrier. Officer Maria Santos, a woman in her 30s, approached our group with a serious expression. "We received a call about harassment involving a baby?" she asked. "Officer, this woman threw my newborn daughter's bottle in the trash," I explained, showing her the contaminated bottle. "Now my baby can't eat." Officer Santos looked at Margaret. "Ma'am, did you throw away this baby's bottle?" "I removed a code violation from a front porch," Margaret said defensively. "Baby equipment cannot be visible from the street according to HOA regulations." "You threw away a baby's food because of HOA rules?" "I enforced community standards that everyone agreed to follow." Officer Santos looked at Sarah, who was still holding crying Lily. "How old is your baby?" 3 weeks, Sarah said through tears. "She was born premature and needs special formula every 3 hours." Mrs. Whitmore threw away her prepared bottle. "The bottle was creating a code violation," Margaret insisted. "Community aesthetics must be maintained." Officer Santos stared at Margaret in disbelief. "You threw away a 3-week-old baby's food because you didn't like how the bottle looked?" "I enforced rules that protect property values and community standards." "Ma'am, that's not law enforcement. That's harassment of a family with a newborn. It's community management that protects everyone's investment and quality of life." I showed Officer Santos the security footage. She watched it twice, her expression growing more disgusted each time. "Mrs. Whitmore, this video shows you deliberately taking a baby's bottle and throwing it away while knowing the baby needed to eat. It shows me removing a code violation from community property. It shows you causing harm to an infant. It shows me protecting community standards from people who think their personal situations excuse them from following rules." Officer Santos looked at me. "Mr. Davis, what kind of formula does your daughter need?" "Special preemie formula that costs $45 per bottle. It has to be prepared in exact measurements and takes 30 minutes to prepare properly." "How often does she need to eat?" "Every 3 hours exactly. If she misses a feeding, her blood sugar drops dangerously low." Officer Santos turned back to Margaret. "So you knew this baby would have to wait at least 30 minutes for food because of your actions?" "I knew that parents who violate community standards face consequences for their choices." "You knew a 3-week-old baby would go hungry." "I knew that rule violations have consequences regardless of the circumstances." Lily was still crying, her hungry wails getting more desperate and weak. Her lips were starting to turn pale, which Sarah recognized as a sign of low blood sugar. "David, we need to get her to the hospital," Sarah said with panic. "Her blood sugar is dropping." Mrs. Patterson had been listening to everything and suddenly spoke up. "I have that same formula at home. My daughter used it for her premature son last year." "You do?" Sarah asked with hope. "I kept some unopened containers. Let me go get them." While Mrs. Patterson rushed to get the formula, more neighbors gathered. Everyone was looking horrified as they learned what Margaret had done. "You threw away a baby bottle?" asked Mr. Rodriguez, a father of 3. "I removed unsightly baby equipment from a front porch," Margaret replied, sticking to her script. "While the baby was hungry?" "While enforcing rules that everyone agreed to follow. Nobody agreed to let you starve babies," Mrs. Chin said angrily. "I didn't starve anyone. I enforced aesthetic standards." The crowd was getting larger and more upset. People were recording with their phones, capturing Margaret's callous attitude toward a hungry baby. "How can you look at a crying baby and not feel anything?" asked Mrs. Johnson. "I feel satisfied that community standards are being maintained," Margaret replied coldly. "You feel satisfied that a baby is suffering?" "I feel satisfied that rules are being enforced regardless of emotional manipulation." Officer Santos had heard enough. "Mrs. Whitmore, you're under arrest for harassment and endangering the welfare of a child." "This is ridiculous," Margaret protested as the officer pulled out handcuffs. "I was enforcing legitimate community standards. You were deliberately causing harm to an infant. I was maintaining property values." "By making a 3-week-old baby go hungry," Officer Santos said as she cuffed Margaret. "That's child endangerment. The child's hunger is due to her parents' failure to follow rules. The child's hunger is due to your deliberate destruction of her food." As they loaded Margaret into the police car, she continued shouting, "This community will be destroyed by families who think babies excuse them from following standards. Property values will plummet. You'll all regret protecting rule violators." Mrs. Patterson returned with the formula and quickly prepared a bottle while Sarah tried to calm Lily. But the baby had been crying for over an hour and was exhausted and dehydrated. "We still need to take her to the emergency room," Sarah said. "She's been without food too long." The rest of the day was spent at the hospital, where doctors confirmed that Lily's blood sugar had dropped to dangerous levels. She needed 4 fluids and glucose to stabilize her condition. "This kind of feeding disruption can be very serious for premature babies," Dr. Williams explained. "Their systems are so delicate that missing even one feeding can cause significant problems." That evening, while Lily was recovering in the hospital, the story went viral. Someone had posted the security footage online with the caption, "HOA Karen throws away hungry baby's food." The video had millions of views within hours. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of our family and outraged at Margaret's cruelty. "How do you throw away a baby's food?" one person wrote. "This woman is pure evil," said another. "HOA presidents are completely out of control," was a common theme. But what hurt most was seeing Lily in a hospital bed with 4 lines in her tiny arms, all because someone thought property values were more important than feeding a hungry baby. The local news picked up the story the next day. "HOA president arrested for throwing away baby's food," was the headline on every channel. Margaret's mugshot showed her still looking defiant, with no remorse for what she had done to a hungry baby. During her interview at the station, Margaret continued to defend her actions. "I was maintaining community standards," she told reporters. "Baby equipment visible from the street violates our aesthetic guidelines." "Even when it means making a baby go hungry?" asked the reporter. "Rules apply to everyone equally, regardless of their personal circumstances. We're talking about a 3-week-old baby. We're talking about property values and community standards that protect everyone's investment." The interview made Margaret look even worse. Her complete lack of empathy for a hungry baby shocked viewers across the country. Comments poured in from around the world, with people sharing their own stories of HOA harassment and expressing support for our family. But the most meaningful response came from the pediatric nutrition company that made Lily's formula. They sent us a year's supply of formula free of charge, along with a note saying, "No baby should ever go hungry because of someone's cruelty." The prosecutor, District Attorney Lisa Martinez, decided to pursue the maximum charges. "Mr. Davis, what Mrs. Whitmore did was deliberate child endangerment," she explained. "She knew that baby needed to eat and she deliberately prevented it." "What kind of sentence are we looking at?" "Child endangerment carries up to 3 years in prison. With the deliberate nature of her actions and her complete lack of remorse, I'll be seeking the full 3 years. The trial was set for 2 months later. Margaret's defense team tried to argue that she was simply enforcing community rules and had no intention of harming the baby. But the security footage was damning. It clearly showed Margaret taking the bottle, examining it to confirm what it was, then deliberately throwing it in the trash. During the trial, Margaret took the stand and made everything worse. I maintain that community standards must be enforced regardless of individual circumstances, she testified. The prosecutor asked, even when those circumstances involve feeding a hungry baby? Especially then. If we make exceptions for babies, soon everyone will claim special circumstances to avoid following rules. So you believe making a baby go hungry was appropriate? I believe maintaining community standards was appropriate. The baby's hunger was a consequence of her parents' rule violation. You threw away a 3-week-old baby's food because you didn't like how the bottle looked on a porch? I removed unsightly baby equipment that violated community aesthetic standards. The jury was visibly disgusted by Margaret's testimony. When Sarah testified about Lily's feeding difficulties in the hospital visit, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Lily needs to eat every 3 hours exactly, Sarah explained. When Mrs. Whitmore threw away her bottle, she had to wait over an hour for food. For a premature baby with feeding issues, that's life-threatening. How did it affect Lily? She cried for an hour straight. Her blood sugar dropped dangerously low. She became dehydrated. We had to take her to the emergency room and she needed 4 fluids. The medical records confirmed that Lily had indeed required emergency treatment due to the delayed feeding. Dr. Williams testified about the dangers of feeding disruptions for premature babies. Missing even one feeding can cause serious medical complications, he explained. Premature babies have very little energy reserves. What Mrs. Whitmore did could have killed this baby. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding Margaret guilty on all charges. Judge Robert Williams looked at Margaret with disgust during sentencing. Mrs. Whitmore, in 20 years on this bench, I have never seen such callous disregard for an infant's welfare. You deliberately caused suffering to a 3-week-old baby because you didn't like how a bottle looked on a porch. Your complete lack of remorse makes your actions even more despicable. He sentenced Margaret to the maximum 3 years in prison, plus 2 years probation and mandatory community service at a children's hospital. Perhaps spending time caring for children will teach you the compassion you so clearly lack, the judge said. Margaret showed no remorse even then. This community will suffer because parents think babies excuse them from following rules, she said as they led her away. But she was wrong. The community rallied around families with young children. The HOA was disbanded and reformed with policies specifically protecting families with babies and small children. A baby-friendly neighborhood initiative was started, making our community known for supporting young families rather than harassing them. New rules were implemented requiring HOA approval before any enforcement actions involving families with children under 1 year old. Lily, now 6 months old, is thriving. Her feeding issues have resolved, and she's growing into a happy, healthy baby. The security footage of Margaret's cruelty is still used in training programs for HOA boards, showing them what happens when rule enforcement becomes more important than basic human decency. Margaret served her full 3-year sentence and was released on probation. She moved to another state, where hopefully she learned something about compassion for children. But I doubt it. The real victory was the community's response. Instead of allowing one cruel person to define our neighborhood's values, families came together to create an environment where children are welcomed and protected. Margaret Whitmore thought she could enforce her twisted vision of community standards by making babies suffer. Instead, she created a neighborhood where every child is valued and every family is supported. And that made all the difference.